I opened the door expecting trouble, not the woman who would completely rewrite the story of my life. I've spent the last 12 years running my own private investigation agency. Before that, I was a police officer, learning the ins and outs of the job from the inside. Eventually, though, I wanted the freedom to be my own boss. So I branched off, set up my own agency, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made, at least professionally. I usually handled 1 or 2 cases at a time, depending on how involved they were. It gave me a comfortable income and the luxury of setting my own hours. I'm 38 now, and at the time of this story, I was about a year out of a short-lived marriage. It barely lasted 6 months. I dated plenty over the years, never had trouble meeting women. Being reasonably good-looking, financially secure, and having a career with some intrigue made me pretty appealing, I guess. My ex-wife, let's call her Lauren, was around my age. She was attractive and carried herself well. We had a decent relationship, not explosive but steady. We dated on and off for about a year before she pushed for something more permanent. One day she suggested a quick trip to Las Vegas. Before I knew it, we were standing at an altar in some neon-lit chapel, saying vows I wasn't sure I really meant. To be honest, I liked Lauren well enough. But love? I don't think I ever really got there. I think I just figured it was time. Time to grow up, to settle down. I had the condo, the income, the quiet life. Seemed like the next step. After the wedding, Lauren moved into my place. A condo with all the bells and whistles. Fireplace, hot tub, pool, gated parking. She'd been living in a small apartment and working as a stylist in a tiny local salon. Her dream, she said, was to own her own place someday. I supported that. Maybe too much. A few weeks into the marriage, I bought her a small salon, 4 chairs, decent location. She hired 2 of her friends to work under her, and Lauren was the owner just like she always wanted. I didn't get too involved in her business, but from the outside, it looked like things were going smoothly. She seemed happy. Independent. Then one Saturday came around. She mentioned she had a couple of clients booked that afternoon and would be home a little later than usual. I told her that worked for me. I had some field work to do for a case anyway and would be out for most of the day. I happened to be in the neighborhood near her salon when I realized I needed to use the restroom. Figured I'd swing by and use hers real quick before heading back out. When I pulled up, I noticed the closed sign hanging in the front window. Thought maybe she wrapped up her appointments early and left. But I had a key, so I let myself in. As I stepped inside, I was already scanning the room. Habit of the job, I guess. Everything looked quiet, but just as I was heading toward the back where the restroom was, I heard noise. And not just any noise. I've been in this line of work long enough to know what those sounds meant. The noise was coming from the office in the back. I paused outside the door, tested the handle, unlocked. My instincts kicked in. I reached for the firearm I always carried. Not because I thought I'd need it, but because it was automatic for me in uncertain situations. Then I opened the door. There she was, Lauren, perched on another man's lap, her skirt hiked up, his hands all over her. They didn't even notice me at first. They were so into whatever twisted moment they were sharing that they didn't hear the door open. My wife of just a few months. In the middle of her own business. On a Saturday afternoon. With a man I didn't even recognize. You can prepare for a lot of things as a private investigator, betrayal, deception, even danger, but seeing it play out in your own life? In your own marriage? That hits different. Margaret let out a loud scream the moment she saw me standing there, like she'd forgotten for a second that I actually had a key to the place. The guy she was tangled up with tried to get up, but I didn't give him the chance. My instincts kicked in. Years of police work and private investigations don't just fade. I stepped forward and hit him once, clean across the face. Left a scratch and a bruise. Enough for him to remember me, but not enough to need a hospital. I told him flat out, get dressed and get out now. And if I ever saw him again, it wouldn't end the same way. He didn't say a word, just scrambled to pull on his clothes and rushed out like a coward. Margaret stood there crying, trying to stammer through some excuse, something about how it wasn't what it looked like. I didn't want to hear it. I held up a hand and told her to stop talking. She was supposed to be my wife, not just legally but in trust and spirit. And instead, she was here, betraying all of that with some guy in the back office of a business I bought for her. I told her it was over. Done. She had 2 hours, that's it, to go back to the condo, gather her things and leave the key on the kitchen table. If she wasn't out by the time I got back, I'd toss her stuff out onto the sidewalk without a second thought. Then I left. Drove straight to my friend Roger's place. He's an attorney, sharp guy, been practicing law longer than I've been doing investigations. It was a Saturday, but he was home, and when I told him what had just happened, he brought me in and poured me a drink. I didn't even sit down before telling him I wanted a divorce. Fast. I explained what I walked in on, told him Margaret could keep the salon. I had no use for it, and frankly, I didn't want any reminders of her. That was all she was getting. If she decided to make this difficult, she'd lose that too. We had a solid prenup, ironclad. She knew it, and so did Roger. While she was packing up, Roger gave me a call. He said she was crying and being overly emotional, even flirtatious. Like she was trying to see if she could charm her way out of the mess. I wasn't surprised. Margaret always knew how to turn on the act when it suited her. But Roger wasn't buying it, and neither was I. Later that day, I went back to the condo to make sure she'd followed instructions. Everything was gone except the key, which she'd left right where I told her to, on the table. That part of my life was over. And just when I thought things couldn't get any weirder, something unexpected happened. If you'd like, I can continue into the next part, with the encounter involving the young woman and how that unfolded. Let me know when you're ready to move on. I looked at her for a long moment before I spoke. You know, I said, keeping my voice steady, back when I was still on the force, what you just did, approaching me like that, would have meant you were going downtown in the back of a squad car. She didn't flinch, just nodded slowly. There was a mix of shame and exhaustion in her eyes. I figured, she said. But I didn't know what else to do. She went on to explain that she'd been living on the street for a while. A man had offered her $20 in exchange for something specific. She didn't spell it out, and I didn't need her to. After she agreed, he told her she'd be better off working out of a motel than risking it out in the open. That's how she ended up knocking on my door. I listened, not as an officer, not even as a private eye, but just as a man who could see the desperation in someone trying to hold it together. Look, I told her, this kind of life you're slipping into is dangerous. You could have been arrested. Or worse. She nodded, eyes brimming. I know, but I have a daughter. And I'm out of options. The mention of her daughter changed everything. Her voice cracked when she spoke of her. A little girl named Trina, only 8, with a medical condition that was getting worse by the day. The weight of that responsibility had driven her to make choices she never imagined herself making. I'm not here to judge you, I said gently. But I do need you to be straight with me. No more dodging. Just the truth. Her name was Peggy. She told me about growing up in the foster system, how she bounced from home to home because her birth parents had run into serious trouble with the law. Most families didn't want her, not because of anything she did but because of where she came from. She grew up feeling like a problem nobody wanted to deal with. By the time she turned 17, she was living with a family she didn't much care for. But she stayed put, waiting for graduation, trying to keep her head down. That's when she met Tim, a boy from school who gave her something she hadn't had in a long time: attention and what felt like love. Not long after graduation, they ran off together and rented a small trailer. Life was never easy for Peggy, but she tried to do right by her daughter. 3 months ago, her doctor prescribed medication for Trina's condition, something she couldn't afford after the bank she worked for laid her off during a round of sudden cuts. She hadn't finished college, so finding another job that offered decent pay and insurance was nearly impossible. Unemployment helped for a bit, but the medical bills started piling up. The coverage ended. The pressure kept building. I thought about reaching out to Children's Services, she admitted, but I was scared. I didn't want them to take Trina from me. I've seen what that system can do to a kid. I sat there for a second, taking it all in. This wasn't just some con. This woman was drowning, and not because she didn't try, but because life kept pushing her under every time she reached the surface. Later that evening, I had a quick run-in with Rob, the motel manager. He saw me in the hallway and chuckled, saying he'd heard some noise earlier. I kept it vague, just told him I had work to do in the morning and reminded him to give me a heads up before touching the room. He agreed, and I slid him a decent tip before heading back. Peggy was waiting when I returned, sitting on the edge of the bed, clearly unsure of what came next. I offered her a place to stay for the night, told her the bed was hers and I'd take the pull-out couch. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. It was late, but I still stopped at the counter on my way back in to grab a few small things: a travel-sized cologne and a tube of lipstick that reminded me of her. Don't ask me why I did it. Maybe part of me just wanted her to feel like a person again, not a statistic. This woman didn't need judgment. She needed help. And I was ready to offer it, if she'd let me. Before heading back to the motel, I realized I had left something behind: a bra I'd picked up for Peggy earlier. It wasn't much, but I figured she might appreciate having something clean to wear, something normal. I went back, grabbed it, packed everything into a small overnight bag and made my way back to the room. When I opened the door, I could hear Peggy singing softly in the shower. Her voice carried through the room in this calm, soothing way. I imagined her singing lullabies to her daughter, maybe trying to bring some peace into what had clearly been a turbulent life. For a moment I just stood there listening. It was humanizing. The water stopped. A few seconds later, the bathroom door creaked open. I must have startled her because she let out a small gasp when she saw me standing there. She was wrapped in a towel, damp hair clinging to her shoulders, looking surprised but not afraid. "You're back early," she said with a shy smile. "You've got a good voice," I told her, nodding toward the bathroom. "I could hear you singing." Her cheeks flushed a little and she laughed it off. Later, while we were both packing up to leave, I asked how she got to the motel the night before. Peggy chuckled, shaking her head. "My car? It's practically held together with duct tape and prayer. Things so old it could qualify as a classic, if rust counted as character." She looked a little embarrassed, but I just smiled and said, "Well, it got you where you needed to be." As we finished gathering our things, she hesitated by the bed, then reached into her purse and pulled out the money I had given her the night before. She held it out to me. "I didn't really earn this," she said softly. "Not the way we both thought I would." I looked her straight in the eye. "You did more than that. You were honest. You were brave. That's worth something." Then I reached for my wallet and pulled out another $300. "Spend another night. No pressure. No expectations. Just talk. Get some rest. You need it." Her eyes welled up again. She nodded slowly, holding the envelope tight against her chest. That woman had probably spent years putting on a strong face for the world. But in that moment she let it crack. And it was okay. We got into my car, a black Mercedes that stood out in the motel lot, and I drove her across town. Later that day I wrapped up work with a client. The case involved surveillance footage, private, intimate moments between his wife and another woman. I had warned him before. These recordings weren't legal for court use since the other party wasn't aware they were being filmed. Still, they might serve another purpose: leverage or at least clarity. I ran the second woman's face through a database and found a match. Thought my client might want to know who his wife had been spending those late hours with. I handed over the footage and a second tape showing hallway activity, timestamps of who entered and exited and when. That part might prove useful. Unfortunately, there was another case that didn't end as cleanly. It involved Peggy. An older file had crossed my desk earlier that week. A report connected to a man named Harold Batty, someone with a polished reputation. On paper, he was a community leader, set to receive a local Outstanding Citizen award in just a few weeks. But Peggy had named him as the man who assaulted her. She filed the report 2 months late, not uncommon in these situations, and the police eventually dropped the case, citing insufficient evidence. Harold claimed it had been consensual and tried to flip the story, asking why she waited so long. But I knew better. That kind of trauma doesn't follow a schedule. My contact gave me the report. The only update on Peggy was a recent ticket for driving an unsafe vehicle, likely that same rusted old clunker she joked about. Later that week, I took Peggy to the hospital for Trina's checkup. There had been a mistake with the admission paperwork. One of the nurses had apparently made a comment about Peggy's eligibility for treatment, and it left her in tears. I pulled the doctor aside and asked him to apologize, not for policy, but for the way Peggy had been made to feel. He did. To his credit, he seemed genuinely sorry. Then I walked over to the admissions desk, pulled out my wallet and handed over my credit card. "Whatever she needs," I said. "Put it on me." Because sometimes, the only thing keeping someone from getting back on their feet is someone believing they deserve to. Before I left the hospital, I asked the clerk at the front desk to give me an itemized bill. I wanted to know exactly what Peggy owed and to make sure any outstanding charges were added to my tab. The young woman behind the counter looked a bit nervous, probably because she'd already informed the doctor that Peggy had a balance she couldn't cover. But I wasn't there to make trouble. I just wanted things taken care of. Peggy hugged me tightly before I left, tearful again, unable to get the words out fast enough to thank me. I just told her everything was handled and not to worry. "Focus on Trina," I said. "That's what matters." The doctor told us Trina was stable. Turns out the medications she'd originally been prescribed weren't doing much, which explained the flare-up. But now that they had proper test results, he was optimistic. He said they'd be adjusting her treatment, and if everything went well, she'd likely be released in a couple of days. That was the best news either of us could have hoped for. Peggy squeezed my hand gently and told me she hadn't forgotten I'd asked to see her again. She said she'd stop by soon, maybe the next day once her friend Sue could stay with Trina for a while. 2 days later, a beat-up sedan sputtered up to my office, belching blue smoke like it was on its last leg. I recognized it immediately, Peggy's old rust bucket. She parked around back and came in quietly. I told my receptionist to hold my calls for a few minutes. Peggy followed me into my office, and I took a seat behind my desk while she settled into a chair across from me. She looked better, more rested, a little more hopeful. I asked how Trina was doing and she smiled. She's good. Really good. The new meds are working and they said she might be home by the weekend, she said. I don't think she'd be here without you. I didn't know what to say to that. She looked at me for a long moment and added, you haven't even met her and you did all that. I see it in your eyes, you've got a kind heart. That hit harder than I expected. No one had really said something like that to me in a while. Well, Peggy, I actually wanted to talk to you about something, I said, shifting gears. Not about us or the hospital, but work. She looked puzzled, then intrigued. I've been thinking about bringing someone in to help with office tasks, phones, scheduling, light bookkeeping. The usual stuff. Peggy sat up straighter. I think I could handle that. I mean, I used to manage appointment books at the salon, and I'm pretty organized. I'm considering offering you a job, I told her. But I'll be honest, it depends on my sister's opinion. She tilted her head. Your sister? I nodded toward the front desk. That beautiful woman out there, June? That's her. She's got an eye for people. She'll know in about 10 minutes whether you're a good fit. Peggy laughed softly. I'd love the opportunity, especially if it comes with benefits. I couldn't tell if she was more excited about the job, or surprised that June was my sister. I called June in knowing she'd be thorough. She was warm but sharp, exactly the kind of person I trusted with decisions like this. I sat back and let her do her thing, knowing her instincts were rarely wrong. While they spoke, I turned back to my desk and opened a file on a new infidelity case I'd been assigned. Another husband suspecting another wife. Or vice versa. I never liked these jobs, not because they were hard but because they always ended the same way. I couldn't remember the last time I uncovered something that didn't confirm a client's worst fears. I used to hope I'd find out the spouse wasn't cheating, that it was just a misunderstanding. But lately? Where there was smoke, there was usually fire. I gave Peggy a quick call after her chat with June. She picked up immediately, voice light and eager. It felt good to hear that tone, like maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe in second chances. Whenever I took on a case, I made sure my clients got the full picture, not just fragments. That's always been my style. I believed in thoroughness even if the answers were painful. So, while I waited for Peggy to get back to me, I kept recording the audio from that house. The sounds I captured were explicit, not the kind you can easily unhear. But it was necessary. Sometimes I'd wonder how people could throw everything away like that, their commitments, their marriages, their dignity. And for what? A thrill? Meanwhile, others out there were fighting tooth and nail just to keep their lives together. On Sunday, I decided to stop by my sister June's place before I met with Peggy again on Monday. As always, she greeted me with a warm hug, and her two little ones came running toward me shouting, "Uncle Dan! Uncle Dan!" June had been married to Bob for around 8 years. He was a good guy, kind, steady, and brilliant with electronics. Bob's the reason I've always had top-notch surveillance gear. That man could make a toaster record audio if you gave him an hour and a soldering iron. While Bob grilled steaks and the kids splashed around in the pool, June and I sat on the back porch catching up. I got right to it. "So, what do you think about Peggy?" I asked, keeping my tone casual but curious. June glanced out at the pool, then back at me. "She's sweet. And she needs help, that's clear. But more than that, Dan, she genuinely cares about you. I saw it in her face when she talked to you, even when she didn't know I was watching." I stayed quiet, letting her words sink in. "She's not faking it," June continued. "There's real gratitude there, not just for the money or the job. I mean emotionally. She cares. So please don't break her heart. She and that little girl have already been through more than most people could handle." I nodded. "You have my word, June. If I ever start mistreating her, even a little, you call me out. I'll listen. I'll fix it. Just take your time with her. That's all I'm asking." I promised her I would. The next day at the office, I was holding Trina in my arms when Peggy stepped out from one of the rooms. She stopped mid-step and smiled, but the second she saw June next to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Is something wrong?" she asked gently. I shook my head, smiling. "Not at all. A little girl just made my whole day, that's all." Later, I pulled Peggy aside and suggested she take her old car down to the dealership. She needed something safer and more reliable now that she was officially working for us. I told her to look for a guy named Ray and let him know she was with me. He'd take care of her. She almost brought up Monty but stopped herself. Instead, she asked if she should bring Trina with her. I told her not to worry, June and I would keep an eye on the little one while she handled the car situation. It would also give her time to clean out her old vehicle and move over the car seat. Later that afternoon, Ray called to give me an update. He said Peggy had shown interest in a compact Mercedes, not the flashiest model but dependable. When he asked her about it, she mentioned it was the same type of car I drove. That made me smile. She came back to the office about an hour later, looking happier than I'd seen her in days. After transferring Trina's seat and her things into the new car, she pulled into my parking spot without even thinking. When she saw me coming down the steps, she gave me a big hug. "Oh, sorry? You're my boss now," she teased, stepping back, her grin playful. June and I both laughed. Peggy had this way of turning awkward moments into sweet ones. She had a knack for doing the small things, the kinds of things that stay with you. At that moment it felt like the past few weeks, the pain, the struggle, the fear, had started to shift. There was something new in the air. "Oh, I never assaulted anyone," he snapped. "What happened between us was consensual. If you've got any more questions, take it up with my lawyer. Now get out of my office." I nodded slowly. "Okay, Mr. Batty," I said, stepping toward the door. "Then I'll stop by the newspaper on my way out. You know, let them know about the daughter you never mention. The one who's going to be pretty important to your Outstanding Citizen Award next week." That made him freeze. His jaw clenched. "What daughter?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You know exactly who," I replied calmly. "But if you need confirmation, I've got her DNA, and I'd be happy to run it against yours." "Your call." He shot out of his chair. "You son of a—" I held up a hand. "You're tired of games? So am I. So here's the deal. You can either cover Trina's medical bills and provide child support for the next 18 years, or I'll make sure every corner of your life, your family, your friends, your public image, knows the truth." He didn't say a word. Just stood there, fuming. "I'll be back in 2 days," I told him. "I'll collect the letter and the check then. If you'd rather settle this in court, that's fine too. I'm sure the press would love a story like yours." I turned, thanked him for his time, and let myself out. That evening, back at the office, Peggy caught me near the hallway and looked unusually nervous. "Dan," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Would you like to go on a real date with me?" she asked, smiling shyly. "My roommate Sue is getting married Saturday, and she told me to bring someone. I've talked about you so much, she said she feels like she knows you already. Would you come with me?" I blinked. I've never even met her. "I know. But it would mean a lot to me." I smiled. "Then I'd be honored to be your date." She looked genuinely happy, like she'd taken a leap of faith, and it had landed in the right place. Later that night, June and I had a quiet moment in the kitchen. I asked if she'd be okay watching Trina on Saturday. She laughed. "Dan, Peggy and I worked that out a week ago. You were the last to know." I chuckled. I guess I was just waiting to be officially invited. The next morning, an envelope was delivered to the office. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 and a typed letter. Harold Batty had signed over full parental rights. In writing, he confirmed he was relinquishing any claim or involvement with Trina, now or in the future. The letter was cold, clinical. But it got the job done. There was a final line. "Mr. Gray, my business with you is concluded. I trust you'll honor your end." I folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope, satisfied with the outcome. Later that afternoon, I called Peggy and June into my office. They both sat down, and little Trina climbed into June's lap with her coloring book. I shared the news. Everything had gone through. The money, the paperwork, the full release of parental rights. It was done. Peggy was stunned. "I don't know how you pulled this off," she said. "But, thank you." She meant it, not just as a casual thank you but something deeper. I could see it in her eyes. I was still learning how to respond to that kind of sincerity from her. I often found myself stumbling around my own emotions when it came to Peggy lately. When the time came to tell her exactly how I felt, I wanted it to be perfect. The right place, the right moment, the right words. That evening, we all met June and the kids for dinner at Red Lobster. Trina insisted on sitting between Peggy and me, which helped take the edge off my nerves. She held both our hands while reading the kids' menu, talking excitedly about crab legs and chocolate milk. At one point, Trina leaned in and whispered, "You're my favorite grown-up." It about melted me. As dinner wound down, Trina handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a crayon drawing of a house with a big tree out front, and 3 stick figures holding hands. Peggy smiled and said, she wanted to give it to you earlier, but she wanted to draw it just right. Later, when Peggy offered to return some of the money I'd given her, saying she didn't need it anymore, June laughed and said, she told me once that if you ever felt she earned it, she'd never give it back. We all laughed. But I knew the truth, Peggy had earned far more than that. Not in dollars but in heart. And she didn't even know it yet. I could have handed the money back to her that night, Peggy had certainly earned it, but something about the moment told me there was a better way. A more meaningful time. That Saturday afternoon, I picked her up for the wedding. It was our first official date, and I don't think I've ever been so aware of someone's presence before. Peggy had this quiet grace to her, like she wasn't trying to impress anyone but still managed to take the air out of the room. Her roommate Sue had already left for the ceremony, which meant that from now on, Peggy and Trina would be living in that little trailer on their own. June was there too, picking up Trina so Peggy and I could have the evening to ourselves. As I stepped onto the small porch, June looked around the place, then walked up to me, her tone soft but firm. Big brother, she said, placing her hand on my arm, follow your heart. Do the right thing. I nodded, already knowing what she meant. When we arrived at the venue, Sue greeted us with a warm, excited smile. She looked radiant in her dress. So you're the Dan I've heard all about, she said, stepping forward to hug me. Nice to finally meet you, I replied. And congratulations. She pulled back slightly and said, thank you for everything you've done for Peggy. I used to wonder what a guardian angel looked like, and now I know. That caught me off guard. I smiled, a little awkward but deeply moved. As the night wore on, I danced every slow song with Peggy. Her head rested against my chest, and I could smell the soft fragrance I'd picked out for her, something floral and warm. I leaned down and whispered, you look beautiful tonight, and you smell amazing. She grinned up at me. Well, you better like it, she said, you're the one who bought it. I held her close, not wanting the music to end. Not wanting the night to end. Later, during a quiet moment, she looked up at me and said, Dan, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I've never met a man like you. I knew I loved you that very first night we spent together, not just because of what you did for me but because of who you are. At first, I was afraid I wasn't in your league. But the more I got to know you, the more I realized. I didn't want to just admire you. I wanted to build a life with you. She reached for my hand. If your offer's still open, I would love to be your wife. I kissed her gently, slowly, savoring the moment. It's always been open, I whispered. I've just been waiting for you to say yes. She paused, her voice quieter now. Dan, there's something I need to tell you. It's a little personal. I looked into her eyes. You can tell me anything. She hesitated, but only for a second. I've had relationships before. Because of Trina, people assume I've done everything. But the truth is, I've never made love to someone. Not in the way that comes from love, not with someone who sees me. Her eyes shimmered with both courage and vulnerability. I'm a little scared I won't know how. I squeezed her hand gently. Then we'll figure it out together. There's no rush. That night, back at my place, we stood at the edge of something new. She looked at the bed, smiled, and said quietly, I want to begin here. The room was dimly lit, just a soft glow from a corner lamp. I put on a CD, something slow and meaningful. Music filled the space like a breath, wrapping around us as we stood there, close but nervous, open and unsure. And somehow, even though I'd done this before, I felt that same nervousness like it was my first time too. Because with Peggy, it wasn't about routine or expectation. It was about something real. Something we were finally ready to share. I turned to Peggy gently and asked, do you want to keep going? Her eyes met mine, full of vulnerability and quiet anticipation. More than anything, she said softly. Just, please be gentle with me. I reached for the zipper of her dress, and as I moved with care, she responded with growing confidence and warmth, like the trust she'd been holding back was now opening fully. Dan, she whispered, let me bring you joy. You've already given me so much. I want to return that. I love you deeply. We moved together like we were learning a new language, one spoken with patience and devotion. And when we finally paused to catch our breath, Peggy laughed lightly and said, I think I might have made a little mess. We both smiled. There was no shame in it, just the simplicity of love finally finding its way to the surface. After resting for a bit, I asked if she'd packed a swimsuit. She reached into her bag and held one up with a playful grin. I nodded toward the patio. Let's take a dip. Cool off for a while, I suggested. Then we can come back in, and maybe get lost in each other all over again. In the pool, under the pale glow of moonlight, she floated beside me, her voice low and sincere. Dan. I love it when you say my name. When you touch me. Are you still mine? I pulled her closer, kissed her forehead. You've always been mine. Even before either of us realized it. Her hand brushed against my chest and she whispered, I need your love. Godspeed your love to me. I was 38 years old, but what I felt that night was brand new. Not just passion but reverence. Like my soul had been wandering for years and finally found its home. We were exhausted, but not from effort. From release. From connection. From the weight we'd both been carrying alone, finally shared. Back in the bedroom, I left the soft music playing and turned off the lights. We just lay there in each other's arms, wrapped in quiet warmth. No more need for words. The next morning, I was up early and made coffee. When I walked back into the room, Peggy was awake, her hair softly tousled, the covers pulled around her. Do you still love me? She asked, voice small. Is your love strong enough to make me your wife? I walked over and sat beside her, took her hand and said, There's no question in my heart. I knew the moment I held you last night. Later that day we met June and Trina at the park. As soon as Trina saw her mom, she ran into her arms with the kind of happiness only a child can express. Peggy knelt down and held out her hand to show her the engagement ring I'd given her the night before. What's that, Mommy? Trina asked. Peggy smiled. It means Uncle Dan and I are going to get married, sweetheart. Trina's face scrunched up in thought. What about me, Mommy? I knelt beside them and gently said, Well, Trina, you probably won't call me Uncle Dan anymore. She tilted her head. What should I call you? If you want, I said, my voice catching just a little, you can call me Dad. There was a long pause, then a sudden flood of emotion. I saw tears in Peggy's eyes. And June's. And even little Trina's. I wasn't immune either. This moment right here, made everything worth it. Every bit of pain. Every risk. Every second of doubt. It was worth it. All of it.